What are we to make of that? Well, the questions we talked about a couple of weeks ago are still relevant, or always relevant when we read the New Testament at least, and the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures. What did it mean then? Well, Matthew's writing maybe 50 years after Jesus. 50 years. Perhaps in the 90s of the first century. And he and the Christians had already experienced, and the Jews had already experienced, the total destruction of Jerusalem. So it's pretty obvious that he's referring in this terrible, harsh treatment that the king brings down upon the invited guests who didn't come, what they, in those days at least, perceived as God's judgment on the leaders of Israel. They hadn't accepted Jesus as the prophet who he was, speaking for God, inaugurating the kingdom of God, and so they were wiped out. That was the way they looked at it. I don't know whether that's, I don't see God doing those things, but that's the way they interpreted it. That's what it meant then. And then, of course, Matthew also was experiencing in his community, in his parish, his diocese, we would say today, a lot of very unsavory characters answering the call of the gospel. Coming in with all the folks who had been Christians maybe for decades. And I think there was, as there always is, a bit of tension when the others appear at a gathering. And so the obvious meaning of the parable is that the kingdom of God is open to everyone, irrespective of what they are or what they were. Because the kingdom of God is meant to make us all into what we should be, what God wills us to be. So the kingdom of God is always open. Now we have to remember that the kingdom of God is not the church. I think that should be pretty obvious by now in our lives. The kingdom of God is not the church. But people who belong to the church have answered the invitation, obviously have answered the invitation, to become part of the kingdom of God. So then the second question is, what does it mean for us now who have accepted the invitation? And we have. We're about to take part in the Eucharistic banquet, which St. Thomas Aquinas says in very beautiful poetry, but I'll say it in translation. This is the hors d'oeuvres of the kingdom. The whole kingdom of God revolves around the dinner table. Jesus spent most of his ministry eating with people. Read the Gospels day after day. And a lot of time, most of the time, it was with the unsavory elements of society. And so the message for us today is that we have to keep a place at the table for everyone. That's the whole church has to do that. And that individual members of the wedding party, that's us, have to do that. It's what the present Bishop of Rome is constantly drumming on. God is merciful. He forgives. He wants everybody to join the banquet. Second question, that's what it means for us today. But what does it mean for me personally? The third question we always need to ask. And that's, each one of us must answer that. But the last part of actually it's the second parable where the king comes in and finds the man not properly dressed for a wedding. Now there's all kinds of explanations for that. Did the person inviting the guests give them a wedding garment and he wasn't wearing it? I don't know. We don't know any of those answers. But I think the obvious message is that there is a certain kind of behavior that's demanded of us when we come to the wedding banquet of the kingdom. For instance, when you go to a wedding reception, you don't go in and stand up against the wall and watch everybody. You get involved. You get a drink. You get some hors d'oeuvres. You go, you mingle. And you make it a convivial experience for everyone. And that's what Jesus is saying here. that there is certain ethical behavior demanded of us who have accepted the invitation into the kingdom of God. We have to behave ourselves properly in the kingdom, which doesn't mean just keeping the commandments. It means getting involved in the kingdom, whatever that may mean in our life, but it certainly does mean welcoming the stranger, welcoming the less than desirable, the less than respectable person. This is the message for the whole church of today, who are already invited in, but not the kingdom. We're not the whole kingdom. And also how we must behave once we have accepted that invitation. The kingdom of God is growing, maybe imperceptibly to us, but it's constantly growing, encompassing more and more people as time goes on, beginning with Jesus. And we need to remain at the party, at the reception, at the dinner table ourselves. And the only way we can guarantee that is by inviting others to sit next to us in the kingdom.